Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me today for today's edition of Daf Yomi. If you can hear the rain, it's throwing it down, so let's start. Bava Kamma 85 Amud B. This is to include in the category of those liable to pay compensation to one who causes the injury unwittingly. One who injures another even unwittingly and even due to circumstances beyond his control is liable to pay compensation for the damage, because the person is always considered for one, and that's from the Rambam Sefer Nezichin Hilchot over Mazik 111 Shulchan Aruch Mitbot 421.3. Just as one who causes injury intentionally is liable, and one who causes injury due to circumstances beyond his control, just as one who causes injury willingly. The Gemara answers, if so, and the verse teaches only this, let the verse write a more succinct phrase: a wound, a petza for a wound, a betfatza. What is taught by the expanded phrase, a wound, a petza for a wound, a tahat patza? Conclude your conclusion from the verse that the one who caused the injury is liable to pay compensation regardless of how he caused the injury, and he must pay compensation for pain in addition to compensation for damage. With regard to compensation for medical costs in the case where one pays compensation for damage, the Papa said in the name of Rava that the verse states, he shall cause him to be thoroughly healed for rapo yirape in Exodus 21:19, and the double term teaches that one who causes injury is liable to give monetary compensation for medical costs in the case of compensation for damage. Gemara challenges this verse is necessary for teaching a different halacha, that which the school of Rabbi Shmuel taught. As the school of Rabbi Shmuel taught, when the verse states v'rapo yirape from here, it is derived that permission is granted to a doctor to heal. The Gemara answers, if so, let the verse write v'rafe yirape, meaning, and the doctor shall heal. Learn from the phrase employed that the one who caused the injury is liable to give monetary compensation for medical costs in the case of damage. The Gemara challenges, but is it still necessary for the halachot we stated previously? It was necessary for the verse to repeat the language of healing. As the Gemara explained, the Gemara answers, if so, let the verse say one of the two words twice, either rapo or yirape. Also repeat the language of the change for rapo yirape. Learn from this wording that the one who caused the damage is liable to give monetary compensation for medical costs in the case of damage. The Brisa states that compensation for pain, medical costs, loss of life, and termination are paid even where the one who caused the injury pays the compensation for damage. The one notes, by inference, it must be that you find these examples of cases where the one who caused an injury must pay compensation for these indemnities that are not in case of damage. They will ask, how would you find examples of these cases that are not in the case of damage? And what answers? For an example of a case where one pays compensation for pain alone is as that which the Mishnah teaches explicitly. How is payment for pain assessed? Even if he burned another with a skewer. So what does that mean? Let's see the footnote. If one burned another with a skewer in a manner that does not result in a wound, and not detract from his life, he only pays compensation for pain alone. If the burn created a mark in a place that is visible, he pays compensation for humiliation as well. Rambam Sefer Nezichin Hilchot over Mazik 2:3 Shulchan Aruch Mitbot 429 over the hot nail, or even if he burned him on his fingernail, which is a place where he does not cause a bruise, i.e. there was no personal injury, only pain, the court evaluates the monetary value of the pain. An example of a case where one must pay compensation for medical costs alone is where some body part was hurting and another came and brought him a strong drug and it whitened his flesh. Certain medical ointments contain acids which cause white patches by destroying the pigments in the skin. If the active ingredient is present in excessive proportions, the patch can be large and last for a significant period of time. If one administered an oil or topical drug to another and it affected the appearance of the skin, he must cover the medical cost of changing back the appearance of the skin to its previous state. I'm safe from the Zichin, Hilchot Hover Mazik 2:3 Shulchan Aruch Mitbot 42010. The halacha is that the second person must give him another drug to restore the color to his flesh, even though he caused him no damage, i.e. loss of function. An example of a case where one must pay compensation for loss of livelihood alone is a case of one who locked another in a room, in Derona. If one locked another in a room and forced him to be idle, he pays him compensation for loss of livelihood. I'm going to say for Nazir and Hilchot Mazik 2-3 Shulchan Aruch, which was before in 2011. Room Ederona from the Greek andron, meaning among the men's quarters, and lounge-room in Greek houses. In Roman houses, the andron was a passageway connecting two houses or courtyards, and forced them to be idle, but did not cause them any personal injury. An example of a case where one must pay compensation for humiliation alone is the case of one who spit in the face of another without causing any personal injury. If one spit in the face of another, he is liable to pay him the indemnity of a humiliation. If he spit on his clothes or humiliated him verbally, he is not liable for that payment. In these cases, the court has the authority to intervene and excommunicate him until he appeases the one he humiliated. Roman Sefer Nazir and Hilchot Mazik 5 Shulchan Aruch Mishpat 2038. The Mishnah teaches how is payment for loss of livelihood assessed. The court views the injured party as though he were a watchman of cucumbers. The sages taught in a Braita in Sefta 9.2. How is payment for loss of livelihood assessed? The court views the injured party as though he were a watchman of cucumbers. And if you say, but the standard of justice was compromised, the Gemara interjects to clarify the statement of the Braita. It appears to be compromised, as when this man will recover, Rashi explains that after his convalescence, the injured party will be able to earn a greater wage than that of a watchman of cucumbers despite his injury. Just like to translate this phrase differently, when this man has his original health, for the injury, this man has the ability to earn these greater wages. He will not collect the wage of a watchman of cucumbers, but rather he will carry buckets and collect a higher wage, or he will travel as an agent and collect an even higher wage. The assessment of loss of livelihood should also account for one of these types of labor. The Gemara quote returns to quoting the Braita. The standard of justice was not compromised because the one who caused him injury already gave him the value of his hand. The Bible explains that the court considers the wage of a typical person who has this injury. Although an exceptional person with the same injury can earn higher wages than what is standard for this type of compensation, the court does not consider unique cases. Others explain that the compensation for the person's unique injury Others explain that the compensation for this person's unique ability to earn greater wages already factored into compensation for damage. The Ramah and the Meiri offer a more detailed explanation for determining compensation for damage. First, explain that compensation is based on the wages of a watchman of cucumbers, applies only to unskilled workers. If the injured party has professional skill that is not affected by his injury, he is compensated his normal wage during his recovery. Or the value of his leg, and that compensation took into account the professional opportunities he lost due to the injury. Bava says, if one severed the hand of another, he pays him compensation for his loss of livelihood as though he were a watchman of cucumbers, provided that the injured party is unable to perform even this rudimentary form of work. If one severed the leg of another, he compensates him for loss of livelihood as though the injured party were a watchman at the entrance of the tool courtyard. If one blinded the eye of another, he compensates him for loss of livelihood as though the injured party grinds with a mill. As the blind person is fit to perform this type of labor, the Ramah writes that these halachot apply to someone without a craft, but that someone who has a certain craft receives compensation for the wages he would receive practicing that craft. I'm saying from Nazir and Hilchot Mazik 211 Shulchan Aruch Mishpat from 2017. Gives him the value of his hand as compensation for damage, and for loss of livelihood, the court views the injured party as though he were a watchman of cucumbers. If one broke the leg of another, he gives him the value of his leg as compensation for damage, and for loss of livelihood, the court views the injured party as though he were a watchman at the opening to a courtyard, because he cannot work even as a watchman of cucumbers, as that requires walking around the field. Cucumber field. Rava continues, if one blinded the eye of another, he gives him the value of his eye as compensation for damage, and as for loss of livelihood, the court views the injured party as though the one who caused the injury caused him to grind with a mill. An hand-operated mill is used by rotating the upper stern of a mill, which rests on a lower stern. Because the mill's operation involves just simple monotonous action with the arm, the worker does not have to move or even see what he is doing. Consequently, even a blind person can perform such labor. An example of this is found in the Prophet where Samson performs his work in prison after he is blind in Judges 16:21. And even a blind person can do this. If one deafened another, one who deafened another pays the injured party his entire value, because without his hearing, he is not fit to perform any job. If the injured party had a craft, the one who caused him injury compensates him according to how the injury affects his ability to perform his craft. Nevertheless, the one who caused the injury does not have to pay more than the value of an uninjured person with no craft. Compensation Nazir and Hilchot Mazik 2:12 Shulchan Aruch, which are made before in 2025, and Dagam Ravaya there. And even a blind person can do this. If one deafened another, I said that, he gives him entire value. His entire value is compensation for damage, because one lacking the ability to hear is not fit for any form of employment. The Rabbi explains that once he loses his hearing, no one will hire him to perform his labor, because he cannot be given instructions. Therefore, causing another to become deaf is like completely destroying his monetary value. However, the dilemma: if one severed the hand of another and the court did not yet evaluate him, if one injured another several times and ultimately deafened him, and the court did not evaluate the compensation after each of the early injuries, he pays the injured party its entire value. He pays him compensation for pain, medical costs, and humiliation for each injury. This is according to the principle that a possibility followed by the term "and if you say" is the side of halacha. If the court assesses the compensation after each injury, and then assesses the compensation for having deafened him, the one who caused him injury pays only the compensation for his entire self. Nevertheless, if the injured party seized property of equal value to each of his injured limbs, plus the value of his entire self, the court does not compel him to return the property. This is because the halacha is left unresolved, and the property remains with whoever possesses it. The Gemara citing the Torah, and the Rosh disagrees and holds that the seizure of the property is not effective, and the court forces the victim to return the money to the one who caused the injury. That's in the Rambam Sefer Nazich and Hilchot Mazik 2:13 Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat for in 2026. To determine the compensation, and then he broke his leg. The court did not yet evaluate him for this additional injury, and then he blinded his eye. And the court did not yet evaluate him for this further injury, and ultimately he deafened him. What's halacha? Do we say that since the court did not evaluate him each time, one evaluation is sufficient when the court determines compensation, and the one who caused him injury must give him the entire value at once, as that is the compensation for deafening him? Or perhaps we say we evaluate each injury one by one, and we obligate the one who caused him injury to give him compensation for each. Rava explains the dilemma. The difference is with regard to whether the one who causes the injury must give him monetary compensation for pain and humiliation for each and every one of the injuries. Although he does not give him monetary compensation for damage, medical costs, and loss of life for each and every one of his injuries, since ultimately he is giving him his entire value after deafening him, he is like someone who killed him, and therefore he gives him the entire value and no more. In any event, he must give compensation for pain and humiliation for each and every one of the injuries. The injured party had pain and humiliation each time. The Rabbi continues, and if you say as a resolution to this dilemma that since the fact that the court had not evaluated him after each injury, the one who caused him injury pays him the entire value altogether, then there is another dilemma. If the court had evaluated him after each injury, but the one who caused the injury had not paid the compensation before he deafened him, what is halacha? Do we say that since it is so that the court evaluated him, the one who caused him injury is required to give him the compensation for each and every one of the injuries? About since the one who caused him injury has not yet paid those compensations for deafening him, he must give him his entire value, and then it shall stand unresolved. Rabbi raises a dilemma. If one injured another causing him loss of livelihood that diminishes his monetary value, what is halacha? The Gemara explains, what are the circumstances of this case? For example, in a case where he struck him on his hand, and his hand became weakened so that he could not work, but his hand will ultimately return to its original health, what is halacha? Should one say, since his hand will ultimately return to its original health, he does not need to give him any compensation whatsoever for the damage, or perhaps in any event he has diminished his value for now? Common here resolution to this dilemma from a Mishnah in 87a. One who strikes his father or his mother, but does not cause them to bleed or bruise, liable to pay 5 times of indemnity for an injury. So if Nazich and Hilchot Mazik for 7 Shulchan Aruch Mishpat for 24:1, and do not cause them to have a bruise, and one who and who therefore is not liable to the court-imposed capital punishment, which is the penalty for the one who causes a parent abuse, and one who causes another on Yom Kippur. One who injures another even intentionally on Yom Kippur is liable to pay 5 times the indemnity. Raman Sefer Nazich and Hilba Mazik 4:9 Shochan Achosh Shemit 424:2. Although one who injures another on Yom Kippur is liable to receive lashes, and money is not generally paid for a transgression that renders one liable to be flogged, one Chakli Ketubah 32b explains that by a Torah edict, one pays compensation for an injury even in this case, and therefore is liable for excision and the one to come carried, and is not liable to receive court-imposed capital punishment, is liable to pay all 5 types of indemnity. Thank you for listening, and all the best. Bye.